Hello and welcome. Before we begin, I must remind you that members of the media and the press are not authorized to participate in this event. If you are from the media or the press, please disconnect from the call now. The content presented on this conference call is proprietary to and/or subject to the copyrights of Jefferies or third parties. You may not externally record, transcribe, publish, or otherwise publicly disclose any portion of this call, including but not limited to the name or other identifiers of the speakers, unless Jefferies permits it in writing. Please note this call is being recorded. By attending this event, you agree to all of these restrictions.
Right, good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening, everybody. It's William Bevington here, and as ever, I'm very excited to have Aniket Shah and I discussing where we are in the global AI trade. And my goodness, how much has changed in the last couple of weeks, even in the last 48 hours, more of that shortly. But no need for me to, you can tell I'm impressively multitasking. The only thing I just want to highlight before Aniket gets started, just to spare his blushes, is that I've just emailed to all 300 investors who are registered for this call a piece of research that he published on June the 12th, actually maybe June the 11th, in which Aniket highlighted in a nutshell, and I'll pass over to him, that the next move in the global AI trade would be downwards. He clearly talks about a lot of other thematic Washington policy issues, but he was warning as early June that we would see what we're seeing now. I will comment later on after Aniket has spoken about what some other Jefferies analysts have mentioned. For example, Desh in quantitative strategy, Chris Wood, we had a call with him last week. But Aniket, with that, over to you.
Great. William, thank you very much, and good morning and good afternoon to all of our clients. We know you have a lot going on given the volatility in the markets. So William and I just wanted to check in with you and share with you some of our latest thoughts on what's happening. I have one basic point that I want to give you right at the get-go of today's presentation. I'm going to present for like 10 minutes, and then William and I are going to go into discussion, and we would love to take questions. One basic point, which is that the U.S. national strategy on AI has broken down, and that there are no clear signs of a new strategy emerging. And this period that we are in, this confusion, this reversion, this reversal still has room to go. That's my argument. That's my message, that the strategy, the Washington, D.C. strategy, and even the Silicon Valley strategy on AI, as has been perceived for the past 4 years, is broken. And we basically, as William mentioned, we suggested as such 7 weeks ago. This was before the SpaceX IPO. This was before the SK Hynix IPO. We said to everyone, the next leg of this trade is a leg downward. And boy, did we get that right. And I just want to explain to you some of the reasons behind that. So for the past few years, the U.S. strategy on AI has been quite simple. Okay, that strategy, the national strategy on AI, has basically been about controlling the technology at the border. Okay, it has been about U.S. leadership on AI. It has been about restricting China's access to the underlying hardware for AI. And that strategy is breaking down for three main reasons, or with three pieces of evidence, all in the last week, which is why William and I are doing this call. The first way that strategy of basically controlling this technology for U.S. leadership has broken down is, of course, the news on July 17th of Moonshot AI and its release of Kimi K3. I was actually in China last week when this model was released. And it was this sort of extraordinary moment because remember, everyone on the call, that for the past 4 years, dating back to actually President Biden, the U.S.'s strategy was basically we are going to restrict China from getting advanced chips because the US has that choke point on China. And by restricting China from getting chips, we are going to stay ahead of them on the AI race. In fact, I was at the Aspen Security Forum just a couple days before this moonshot AI release, and the head of Anthropic's national security team, who is an ex-Biden official, comes out and he says, we're 6 to 9 months ahead of China at a minimum. In fact, we are actually more like 12 to 18 months ahead. Well, moonshot AI's release has turned that whole discussion upside down. And for sure, you know, there's still debates about how advanced China's models are versus the most advanced models in the US. There are certainly questions about how advanced China's chips are versus the most advanced American chips. But even if with less advanced models and less advanced chips, it seems like the Chinese approach is actually accelerating. Okay, so strategy number one was restrict China through export controls. That broke down in Washington thinking last week. And now you see all this drama with Sam Altman and Jensen Huang and all these guys going to DC right now as we speak, trying to help policymakers figure out what to do next. So that's one. The second thing that happened in the last week that shows that the national AI strategy around national strategy around AI has broken down in the US was around AI safety. Now, many of you might sort of think that the AI safety, discussion is a sort of a Luddite discussion, that this is not actually investment relevant. And you'll remember last year, Vice President Vance went to Paris for the major AI summit, and he railed against AI safety as a topic. In fact, and I'm quoting from his speech, he said, quote, "The AI future is not going to be won by hand-wringing about safety. It will be won by building from reliable power plants to the manufacturing of facilities, blah, blah, blah." And the whole speech was about stopping this discussion of AI safety, stopping this discussion of AI regulation. We don't want the European approach in America. That was Vice President Vance's mindset, which was really the mindset then that drove federal policy around AI since President Trump got elected. Well, this strategy broke down on July 16th and July 21st, again, just in the last 2 weeks. And on July 16th, you all know, Hugging Face reported an autonomous agent that had basically broken through its cybersecurity walls. And 5 days later, OpenAI confirmed that this agent was theirs. And that the agent was sort of acting on its own and was doing so, and this is very important, folks, was doing so in a highly controlled setting. So this wasn't about a misaligned AI agent. This was in a testing ground, in a testing room around these AI agents. You saw a moment like this, something that, we all have read about and have been concerned about, this then sort of happening and becoming an issue around cybersecurity for AI companies. That happened just 2 weeks ago. That has led in the last, just 5 days ago, a Democratic congressman named Ted Lieu and a Republican congressman named Nathaniel Morin to introduce something called the AI Kill Switch Act, which would allow the US government to shut down rogue models if you have other instances like this. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying strategy number 2 of the US was, you know what, folks? We're going to have light touch regulation. We're not going to focus on safety. And now a year later, you're having moments like this, which frankly, a lot of the AI safety people warned us would happen. The third thing that has broken down in the last around AI strategy is basically that Washington, D.C. today doesn't really know how it wants to regulate or guide AI anymore. And the way I think about it, William, there are 4 different approaches in Washington that are being discussed while we speak. And, we have a lot of friends, a lot of contacts in all of these discussions right now. And I just want to lay out simply what those 4 sort of main boxes are. The first box is the box of a voluntary review and pre-approval of frontier models before they are released. Okay, this was an executive order that President Trump released on June 2nd, saying that companies should voluntarily submit their AI models for review from the US government 30 days before they get released. This is now being worked through. The final day of comments around this is this Saturday. So that's one approach where the US government voluntarily will get models, will run them through tests before they get released. There's a second approach that is being discussed by Scott Bessent and by some of the sort of leaders of AI like Demis Hassabis, which is to create a FINRA-like regulator for AI that would basically regulate AI and AI models and AI development the way that financial institutions are regulated through FINRA, reporting up to the SEC. Apparently, the Treasury Secretary is in favor of this kind of approach. But again, what we're talking about is a different model and a different approach than this voluntary kind of approval that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. The third approach that is being discussed in DC right now is best evidenced by a bipartisan piece of legislation known as the Frontier Act. And this is basically a bipartisan AI regulation legislation by Congressman Obernolt and Congressman Trahan. And these 2 individuals are basically suggesting that AI should be regulated like a consumer product. And then the fourth approach, which is also being discussed, is the restriction of Chinese open source models in the US, basically treating AI, certain models like contraband. That's an interesting approach as well, especially given the fact that American companies are increasing their adoption of Chinese models, not just because of their quality, but more importantly because of their cost. Because all of this is happening, this sort of re-examination of strategy at the same time as companies are becoming much, much more cost sensitive around AI as they were in the past. The final thing I will say before I mention some of the implications of this confusion is many of you on the line know that my team and I were probably the first team on Wall Street talking about the AI backlash at the social and political level. We started writing about that over a year ago. And now you are seeing hundreds of billions of dollars of data center projects being canceled and delayed because of public opposition. And to be honest, that's not slowing down, and it's actually accelerating in all across the US and all across the world, even more importantly. And so that you haven't seen a major shift on either. So what are the implications of all of this? If I could just suggest a couple for investors, again, with my Washington policy and my thematic research hat on, here's what I would say to you. Number one, in general, and if you look at the note that William sent to you in your inbox that we published 7 weeks ago, what we said, and I'm going to repeat it here so that there's no question around what our thesis is. What we said in exact words is we said, quote, we're bullish on AI, but we believe that the payoff will take longer to materialize than markets expect. And so we basically have said that And what I said the implications were, and this was again June 11th, stay bullish long-term, but brace for near-term disappointment. Favor cost-efficient models and companies, and shift focus to successful AI adopters. That was my investment thesis 7 weeks ago. That still holds today. What I mean by this is I am extremely excited about the technologies that are being unlocked by AI, for sure. And if you're not, you are living in denial. I really do believe that. But that is a evolution, and the markets were priced for a revolution around AI. That was the title of that note. Evolution, not revolution. And so we said that we were going to see the next leg would be a leg downward, and then there was going to be a reassessment of this technology in every which way. Its impact on return on invested capital for hyperscalers, its impact on regulation, and so on and so forth. So the point number one is that we really do remain excited about these technologies, but we think in the near term, there is going to be a continued reevaluation of all of these different elements of the technology, the regulation, the policy, the costs, the returns, the adoption, and so on and so forth. The second thing I said in that note is favor cost-efficient models. Let me just, I said this before the Kimi K3 thing came out because I was so taken by the DeepSeek from last year when many of my colleagues, many people in our industry said that it's a nothing burger. And I said, what are you talking about? If you know anything about how the Chinese develop technology, you should know that this is the harbinger of what's to come. And so costs are going to come down around the models massively. And they already have, and they're going to, and that's only going to happen more and more. And it doesn't just mean that Chinese open source models win. American open source models could also win. In fact, I think you're going to see a huge development of that. And even Jensen Huang came out and said this, which is quite something in his wonderful essay that came out a couple days ago in support of open source models. And the final sort of thesis about this is AI adoption. Both countries and companies that adopt AI well, as opposed to just the companies that are supplying the AI technology, needs to be of higher focus for investors. And we have a few ideas around how to identify those as well. So that's where we are. Just to summarize, the US and specifically Washington and Silicon Valley, to be honest, because Washington and Silicon Valley are one when it comes to AI. Meaning they are working very closely together. They are in a massive moment of confusion, and the whole world turned upside down for them in the last 2 weeks. Many of the chickens came home to roost, and I don't think this is going to simplify and clarify itself for some time. And we wanted to just spend a little bit of time with our clients today talking about this and thinking it through. So with that, I went a little longer than the 10 minutes, but William, hopefully that was clear, and I'll hand it back to you and to our clients.
No, that's great. Thank you. And just to remind everybody, if you just reply to the email I've sent out, attaching that document that Aniket referred to, then I can ask any direct questions that you have in addition to those that have come in, which I think basically are around where we are now and kind of what happens next. But before I flag that, I would like to highlight on behalf of Jefferies and many of the analysts I work with, of which Aniket is one, but we've already flagged very clearly that Aniket was the first analyst strategist within Jefferies. I would suggest one of the first, maybe the first on the street, to have highlighted in early June that this trade was ending down, probably one of, if not the most crowded trades in history. Certainly the Asia memory AI trade has got to be one of the top 3 most crowded trades in history, but globally, clearly it's exceptionally crowded. But I'd just like to highlight that after Aniket had flagged that first, we then had our own Desh, our global head of quant, highlighting that the AI momentum trade was about to turn negative as we entered into the summer. We then had Chris Wood last week highlighting very, very clearly and very eloquently, and I have the replay of that call if you'd like to have it, that there are a number of hurdles, to say the least, on the horizon. The first would be the market's obsessive belief that return on invested capital of the hyperscalers' multi-billion-dollar, multi-hundred-billion-dollar capex jamboree being passed on to the picks and shovels, mainly the semiconductors and others, clearly was going to be questioned increasingly soon. Again, the return on invested capital. So that has clearly happened. He also last week highlighted, as he has done before, that the four major hyperscalers capex schedules, which kept running up and up to almost 900 billion through 2027, surely should come to an end at some point. In other words, the almost sequential quarter-on-quarter increase in those capex numbers, that momentum surely was going to come to an end at a point when I would highlight the valuation multiples of the AI trades globally were kind of discounting that would not come to an end at some point, discounting near perfection, simply put. And then I think the first banana skin was Meta suggesting that their capex, through a sort of multifaceted announcement, but basically suggesting to the market that their capex would not need to go up as much as the market expected. They subsequently retracted that, but that concern remains. And most importantly, again, as Chris was highlighted, the return on invested capital is still largely unproven. He also highlighted last week that the direction of US Treasury 10-year yields is one key issue facing US correlated world stock markets, particularly given it's another issue in the AI capex arm race. And then today, we have had Sherman Shang and Fubon, our top-rated semis hardware analyst, putting cold water on his CoWoS numbers, the building blocks of global WFE, global AI, if you like, and actually saying that NVIDIA's Rubin chip will suffer a delay. And then even more importantly, we've had Edison Lee in Asia today downgrading his DRAM memory numbers, and that's also scaring people. So as I said to Aniket a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing this, we kind of had a perfect positive storm to the upside over the last 18 months. And in the space of only a few weeks, starting again with what Aniket said on June the 11th, we kind of had a perfect storm to the negative side at a time when we're going into a summer period in which historically people take risk off. So that's a long speech from me, but I think it's just important to highlight where it all started and where we are now. And finally, on this point, before I ask Aniket a precise question, is I think the issue here is valuation. It's going to come down to the valuation of individual stocks, as well as this ever-present, won't go away anytime soon, question mark on return on invested capital. So my precise question to you, Aniket, now is kind of what happens next? What do you see? I mean, what happens next? But particularly from, let's say, a policy perspective, given the doom and gloom that the market share prices are now factoring in, do you see incremental negatives from a policy perspective, or things actually getting slightly better?
Yeah, good question. So look, let me say this in the positive way so that everyone understands our thesis and how we're thinking about the world right now. And by the way, we've been completely constant on this for the last year. We think AI is normal technology. You've heard me say this probably 20 times on these calls. That is not a phrase that I developed myself. It is a wonderful essay written by a Princeton academic 2 years ago called AI as Normal Technology. His name is Arvind Narayan. We've asked our clients to read it. We can send it after this call. Highly recommend people read that essay. It completely changed and framed my thinking about where this whole technology goes. Now, what do I mean by normal technology? Because you might be thinking, wait, hold on, Aniket, you said that this is extraordinary in its capabilities. What I mean is that it is normal technology in the sense that, like other technologies in the past, whether it's electricity, railroads, the internet, AI is going to have speed bumps along the way of its diffusion through society. And those speed bumps are what we are going through right now. And William, you remember this notion of speed bumps. We've talked about it for a long time. The things that you alluded to are all part of the normal technology framing. There's a speed bump around corporate adoption and proving value and ROI from a new technology. That has always been the case. There is a speed bump around regulation, which we are going through right now. You know, just like their markets can overreact, so legislators can also overreact one way or another, and over time they find the right balance. And so to answer your question of what comes next, I would ask everyone to realize that AI is normal technology, not in its capabilities. Its capabilities could be extraordinary, but it is normal in that it will be regulated, it will be controlled, it'll become part and parcel of our systems the way that other extraordinary technologies in the past have. Now, that's a long overarching thesis for me to say something very specific to you, because William asked what comes next. I think what comes next is over the next several months, you will start seeing a regulatory apparatus around AI that starts making a little bit more sense in Washington. Those 4 or 5 different approaches that I mentioned earlier, the FINRA-like regulator versus the executive order on voluntary pre-approvals versus the National AI Act, you are seeing a level of energy in Washington around AI today that you have never seen before, because, a crisis sort of creates that kind of focus. And so, William, you asked what's going to happen. I think in the next several months, we are going to see a little bit more clarity around the policy and the strategy and the regulation of this technology at the federal level. I don't know which one of these approaches is going to win. It might be some combination of all of them, but you are going to see DC step in and regulate this. And by the way, when that happens, you all on the call should find that to be very good. That is a bullish thing. That is not bearish. Many investors have this mindset, many of us on the sell side too, that regulation is always bad. That's not true. In fact, you need some kinds of regulation in order for people to feel comfortable using and adopting a technology. So point number 1 is that we are going to see a more coherent strategy and policy and regulation around AI going forward. Whether that's days, weeks, I don't know, but it's not years. It's going to happen in the short to medium term. That's number 1. Number 2, you are going to see a major push for open source models. When Jensen Huang is saying this, and by the way, a letter that was signed by everyone, by IBM, Palantir, Google, all of these companies have said, we need to adopt open source models. We need to have a richer complex of open source models in the United States. I would ask you all to take note of that. Now, that has negative implications for the value of Anthropic and OpenAI, for sure. But it is positive for the broader AI technology, because open source is actually something that is really good for technology. Let me remind you all that we wouldn't have the kind of AI boom that we have right now if Google didn't keep its academic research, including the research that created the T of GPT, the transformer work that came out of Google Labs. That was open source. That was released to the world to be used and to be integrated in their technology. So I think you're going to see a greater emphasis on open source technology around AI, which is going to bring down the costs dramatically of this technology. And I think we should be watching for that. Number 3, the third thing we're going to see, William, is we're going to see the center of gravity of AI shift much more towards Asia and specifically towards China than it has been. The AI complex, you and I were talking about this when we were chatting this morning. You know, AI has been synonymous with America up until 6 months ago, because it was NVIDIA, it was OpenAI, it was Anthropic, it was Facebook, you know, the great American companies that made a lot of money on the back of this technology. Then over the last several months and years, it was, you know, TSMC, then South Korean companies and so on and so forth. And now China is seen as a really, really important player. I've always believed China is a super important player. If you know my work, you know I'm the loudest voice on Wall Street telling our clients to watch what's happening in China tech. And I've been screaming this for past couple of years, and it's happening now. And I think China's role around AI needs to be viewed in the same way that China's role in telecommunications 25 years ago happened, where Huawei basically brought down the cost of telecommunications and infrastructure around telecoms for the whole world. China's approach to AI should be viewed in the way that the Chinese auto industry has evolved in the last 10 years to become now the main go-to auto sector of the world. Chinese AI should be viewed in the way that Chinese solar and batteries have been seen, which is low-cost goods that can be exported around the world. We're now seeing that around AI. And I would ask our clients to read, please, President Xi Jinping's speech on AI at the World Artificial Intelligence Conference. Really, like, it's worth reading. And William and I are hosting our dear friend Edison Lee tomorrow on a call, because he was actually there in the room, I believe. He was certainly at the conference, but you can read the speech. It is very clear that the Chinese want their infrastructure and architecture around AI to be used around the world. That is a national strategy. And because it's open source and because it is cheaper, it's not super cheap, but it's cheaper than the American approach, they actually have a chance of achieving that, like they have in other technologies. And so I would just ask our clients to think much more about the China's role in all of this. The final thing I would say, you know, where does this all go next? So I mentioned AI regulation happening in the US, a refurbished AI strategy, which is much more thoughtful, and that's bullish. I mentioned greater emphasis on open source of American companies and Chinese companies. I mentioned China being more central. And William, the final thing I would suggest to our clients before we let everyone go is, and I'll be honest here about myself. I used to think the AI safety stuff, William, was like, as I mentioned earlier, sort of Luddite thinking, anti-technology thinking, like, you know, don't think about the safety stuff. That's, you know, I very much embrace the JD Vance view on this, that you got to just build it and stop being too worried about the safety stuff. And we've written a lot of notes on AI safety. We've hosted the AI 2027 people. Like, we know that literature quite well. But I dismissed it. I'm no longer dismissing it. Because the more I read about this Hugging Face breakout, the more I realize that these technologies do have some of these risks that will need to be protected against. And so that's going to be very bullish for cybersecurity in general. I think cybersecurity companies and cybersecurity tools will see a lot of focus and a lot of attention to deal with some of these breakout autonomous agents doing what OpenAI did. And I'm going to just be spending more of my time getting thoughtful about AI safety. And that's also, I think, something that the market's going to have to appreciate in a way that they haven't appreciated in the past. So that's sort of where I think this. I'm not going to give you individual stocks to buy, because that's not really my day-to-day job. But directionally, direction, just so it's clear, I think the U.S. is figuring out, as we speak, a new approach to this technology. and a new approach to this entire ecosystem. And it's in mass confusion right now as we speak. But I think what will come out of this is a better and more coherent approach. And we'll be watching out for that, and we'll be writing a great deal about it.
One final quick question from me, which encapsulates a lot, which has just come in, is given the confusion you just highlighted, the policy confusion, just broadly summing it up, a kind of industrial confusion, but maybe less so, but certainly stock market confusion. In a nutshell, and the answer can be yes, of course. Here in the UK, there is what's the right word? Enormous, almost sort of explosion in backlash against data centers all over the press in the UK. We've seen that in Germany for a while. I think it's unquestionably growing in Europe. It clearly kicked off in the US first because that's where geographically where most data centers are. But my quick question is it the case that literally in the last couple of months, you have the impression that the electorate's pushback against having a data center built in one's backyard has definitely increased, and therefore presumably that and everything else you just said will be an increasing issue for midterms?
Oh my goodness! I mean, it's in the Western world. It is, the backlash is accelerating.
Yeah, that's my point.
It's not slowing down at all. Now, there's a good question about whether that matters, and that's a good pushback. Like, does it matter that there's this data center backlash? My answer is yes. I think it's not the main reason that you won't see all the announced projects actually getting built. I think the main reason you're not going to see all the announced projects getting built is because of low ROIs, because of energy constraints, because of labor constraints. There are all these other reasons, but the backlash is real. It is bipartisan in America, and that's not changing at all. What I would say, William, about this, and this is anecdotal, this is highly, highly anecdotal, but you're going to have to just sort of appreciate my observation skills here, which is I was in China last week seeing our clients there, and an amazing trip. I would ask all of our clients who haven't been to mainland China recently to get on a plane and go there, because it's just really important to see what's happening there with your own eyes. And there was the number one topic with our clients there was about AI data center backlash. I mean, that's really all people want to talk about. And as I was bringing this stuff up, and this isn't just in China, this is all across Asia. Every time I would bring up the fact that the American public opinion on AI being so negative and public opinion about data centers being so negative, William, I would get actual chuckles. It was sort of funny. Like, people would sort of laugh at this. There'd be like, they knew it, of course. They were fully aware of this backlash. But it was this sort of like, we don't have anything like this in China. They don't have a data center backlash, and it is just sort of important to note that I know full well, and Edison has written about this very thoughtfully, that Chinese chips are a fraction of fraction of as advanced as U.S. chips. Although, by the way, we were being told by our clients of some pretty amazing companies that are developing in China that will compete with NVIDIA over the next few years, and we can talk about that with Edison tomorrow. But even with less advanced chips, even without a domestic power or a domestic energy source, the way that the U.S. is the most energy abundant country in the world, maybe U.S. and Russia, the Chinese don't have those constraints. And so again, I know that in the short term, a lot of our clients have to figure out positioning and valuations and sentiment. But on a 3-year, on a 5-year basis, it is amazing to see how these two different countries are evolving on this. And again, as I mentioned, it is worth reading President Xi's speech in detail just to understand what that poll on AI could look like. So that's what I would say about that.
Perfect. I think we should end there, Aniket, but thank you so much. And thank you for flagging what we're doing tomorrow, and I'll send that around to everyone as well now.
Excellent. Guys, thank you very much for your time. William, my friend, thank you for hosting a great call and great discussion, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.